I'm just going to present very quickly, I hope, and I apologize to those of you who've seen this already, because none of this is super new, but I thought maybe some people, especially in the alumni community, wouldn't know about this, and you might want to know. I'm presenting on a couple of things I did a few years ago, one thing several years ago and one much more recently, just last year, about modeling neurons from data. Here's a famous quote from me right now. It's fun to me. It's fun to make stuff from data. So it's often really fun to model things like neurons. They're amazing structures, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't do them by hand, but it's often really inspiring to actually go to the data sources that are available and actually use those as sometimes just a starting point. Modern medicine is rife with different kinds of data, imaging data, morphology and morphometry data, phylogenetic data, molecular data, all sorts of different kinds of data. Many times these data are in forms that we can actually manipulate and do something with, and that's what I did here. I wanted to mention, as I was doing this, I was setting this up 2 nights ago, and I saw that a paper appeared a week ago that was just, to my mind, mind-blowing, and it's a little bit about the kind of imaging data that you can get. And I just want to, this is totally off topic, but I just want to show, it's a little bit on topic. So many new kinds of imaging, one of which is a lattice light sheet microscopy, for which Eric Betzig won the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago. But this is an example of something by Loic Royer, who is a researcher who's looked at that. And this is a Drosophila fruit fly embryo forming, where you can see every single cell. It's a you can do live imaging without phototoxicity of these cells. And in this case, they've also stained for the formation of the nervous system. And so you start to see the nervous system forming. That's just amazing, you know. The fact that there are these new techniques coming around that allow you to see these kinds of things. Sorry for this off-topic stuff, but I think it's just great. It's also amazing. You can track the migration of individual cells with this imaging. He's also, this is an example of a zebrafish brain and the brain activity being read in real time, and it's very cool. And then the thing that is just a week old, which I find astonishing, is CRISPR-Cas9 being visualized using an atomic force microscope in Japan. And you can see they can image individual molecules and DNA strands. And so here's a DNA strand, the CRISPR-Cas9 complex. And then when the pink arrow appears, it's undergoing a conformational change, and then you see it cleaves the DNA. Isn't that amazing? It looks kind of like what we do. It's amazing. You could never see this stuff before. We're kind of right. That's what it looks like. With these new molecular technologies or molecular visualization possibilities, there are all sorts of, these are kind of inspiration for the kinds of things we do. Sorry, that's completely off topic, but I just love those and I wanted to show them. Going back to data and neurons, I learned of Neuromorpho.org, which is a kind of like the PDB for neuron structure data. It's where scientists upload their neuron morphology research, and it's publicly accessible, and it's searchable via organism, body region, cell type. So essentially you can look through, and it gives you previews, kind of like you see those little previews of what the cells look like. You can download what are known as SWC files, or Neuromorpho files. And this is what those files look like. So I looked at the file and I said, oh my goodness, that's such a simple, that's such a simple file format. It has a few comments at the beginning, and then it has a series of numbers that are the line number of the file, then a single numeral that determines what the current structure is. So 1 indicates that it's the soma, or the cell body. 3 is an axon. Then 3 a triplet of x, y, and z coordinates for where that's located, then a diameter of that feature, and then the final numeral is the parent, indicates the parent line. What is this related to in the hierarchy of the cell? This is like, you can create something very easily out of something like this. So I learned Python to write a Python script for Cinema4D. I had to go away on a trip for a few days, so I took some Python documentation and read it on the plane. It was not as easy as that, obviously. I'd had some programming experience, so it was learning a new syntax and that sort of thing, but I was able to put out a script. Then a few years later, I decided that that was cool. And at the same time, I should mention that Stewart Jansen also did the same thing. I think, did we do it competitively? I don't know. We were kind of doing it at the same time, and Stewart did the same thing for Maya. So on the Biocinematics, his website, you can actually download this, an equivalent script or a similar script for Maya that does the same thing. And then just recently, I started to get into ZBrush. ZBrush is a very cool tool. Found out that it had a scripting language as well. It's called ZScript. It's a terrible, terrible language. It's incredibly limited and awful. But with some help from people in the ZBrush scripting community, I was able to write a script that does a similar kind of thing for ZBrush. And these two have complementary uses. And so here's just an example of a really poorly rendered, example of a neuron that was, boy, that's dim, isn't it? Wow. A neuron that was taken from that was essentially exported with some noise put on it and, and rendered. Here's another one that I just did last night because I thought I should have another one. And it's a different kind of cell. This is an olivocerebellar cell from a rat and has just some beautiful kinds of morphology that comes from natural objects that you could create, but it's kind of lovely to see it and know that it's kind of real. So how does this work? I'll give the URL for where to get them get these scripts. I've just made them open source and available on GitHub. And the way that they work is, for instance, the first one. Oh no, what's happening? If you have it and there are installation instructions there, the way that it works is, for instance, in this view, if I can see it, help, script. Here we go, user scripts. Here it is, Neurobuild. This is in Cinema4D. If you run it here, it brings up a little dialog box and it says, how do you want this built? And there are some options. And then it tells you to import a file. So I've downloaded some files from the Neuromorpho site. They are in here, Neuromorphic Files. And there are all sorts of different files there. One of the things you might want to pay attention to is the size of the file. It doesn't matter so much here in Cinema4D because this script operates very quickly. So if, for instance, I don't know what this is going to be, but I'm going to choose it and open it. I can't remember what this neuron is, but very quickly, I don't know if you can see that, but it is created, and this is a very complex neuron, as you can see. I think it's a basket cell. And you get the neuron morphology. What's nice, at least in the Cinema4D context, is that it's made of a hierarchy of things that will allow you to, you can actually get at the components that make this up. So there are splines there that indicate the path of each one of these parts of the cell, and you could, for instance, use those as animation paths for signals or something like that. So that's one thing. Then in ZBrush, it's a little bit more complex because ZBrush is such a funky application. But the way that it works in ZBrush is there is a ZScript menu, which is down here now, sorry, ZScript. In ZScript, doesn't have a kind of conventional plugin structure. So in ZScript, I want to load it. And here, what I want to do, I'm not loading the data file. I first have to load the script, and then I have to load the data file. So I'll find the script. I'll go to my Neurobuild folder. Here's the script. It's just a text file. It's going to read that ZScript in. It actually compiles it into this, which is a compiled script, but I'll just do this again. Now, nothing seems to have happened. ZBrush, as part of its many weird interface eccentricities, has this something called a tutorial palette near the bottom. It's that you pull up on this handle near the bottom. And within that, this button has appeared that says Import Neuromorpho SWC file. If I bring that up, now it's asking me for the data. And so I find a data file. I'm going to find a small data file here that's not too big. Here's a human retina cell. It's only 29 kilobytes, so I know that it'll be fairly fast. If I double click on that, ZScript is much, much slower than Python, so it's single-threaded and it's just doing some weird stuff. It's also building it in a different way. So hopefully it works. This is exciting, isn't it? This is the best part of the presentation. So what it's actually doing, there we go. It read, it says 855 lines, scale factor. And now it's going to build the cell, and it's going to build it as this, which is a Z-sphere file. And if you are, how many people here use ZBrush? Only, well, a good number. Yes. So what it's actually done, this is an amacrine cell from the retina, and it shows a very typical kind of big cell body and spreading planar arrangement of the axons and dendrites. So what it's done is it's actually created this weird kind of creature that is a Z-sphere. And it does actually allow you to go in and, if you want, change aspects of these things. So I could, for instance, if I can get it to work. No, it won't let me. Why are you not letting me? Okay. Oh, I'm doing the wrong thing here somehow. But it should actually allow you to art direct this. So what you have now is something that's accurate, but you can actually go in and take a root Z-sphere and move it so that you move a dendrite in a particular direction. But this is not a mesh that you can use in anywhere else. So what you need to do is take this and make an adaptive skin. And this is the only thing, if you guys want to go home and try this, as I'm sure you're all dying to do, the one thing you have to remember if you don't want ZBrush to crash is to click on this option, which is to, in the adaptive skin, use classic skinning. And that will actually, that's the make ZBrush not crash in this context button. And when I preview this now, you're going to see what it develops, what it creates, and you have some options here for making a higher density mesh, using Dynamesh or not. You have some options down here for adjusting how different parts of the mesh branch. And when you're happy with what you have, then if you make it an adaptive mesh, it creates a new tool, which is here, which is the mesh that you could export and use in another application, like Maya or Cinema4D. And the nice thing about this, unlike what we do in Cinema4D, this gives you a sculptable mesh that you can do something interesting with. You could, through a number of operations, you could make a sculptable mesh out of what the Cinema4D plugin does, but this is more direct. So wrapping up, and we want to get to the good stuff. That's where you can find it. If you just Google NickWoolridge and GitHub, this will also come up. So the two scripts are there, and they're available for download. And there are some movies there to explain how to use them. And the page looks like this, and the description is there. And the how-to videos are on Vimeo. So, and that's all I got. Thank you.